This unit is the age of exploration. Europeans leave Europe, not just on crusade, but to establish colonies and discover new trading areas around the world, including the Americas. The end of the Middle Ages had afforded the Europeans numerous opportunities to interact and trade with Asia. Contacts made as a result of the Crusades demonstrated to the Europeans some of the many benefits they could gain by trading with both the Near and Far East. Europeans developed a taste for the goods that could be found in the East, but overland trade routes were costly and required an enormous amount of money. There were several distinct spheres that were acknowledged by the end of the Middle Ages: Europe, the Muslim world, including North Africa, and Asia. While each of these was seen as independent of the others, much contact and interaction occurred between these spheres. During the Middle Ages, the Vikings probably discovered the New World long before Christopher Columbus set sail. Exploration occurred under such Viking explorers and settlers as Eric the Red and Leif Erikson, and they probably did reach the Western Hemisphere, which resulted in the establishment of a short-lived settlement in Newfoundland known as Vinland. There are also some who suggest that the Chinese may have reached the coast of America. Marco Polo returned to Europe with tales that China could be reached by water. Exploration was partially fueled by the developing ideas of the Renaissance that had been discussed since the late Middle Ages. While most educated Renaissance humanists believed that the world was round, there was little real understanding of the size of the circumference of the earth, nor any reason to believe that a separate world existed in the Western Hemisphere. Stories of the mythical Christian king Prester John, who purportedly lived in Africa or Asia, the lost continent of Atlantis, and a Japanese island, all enticed Europeans to embark upon voyages of exploration. While these stories may have motivated some early explorers, there was no real sense that a new world would be discovered. As the feudal era came to a close in most regions of Europe, several significant economic developments occurred that helped contribute to the developing ideas and motives of exploration. Although feudalism had resulted in a decentralized environment, limited trade had occurred between the villages and manors along traditional and emerging trade routes. Italian ships sailed the Mediterranean to participate in trade with Asia, and northern traders sailed between the English and Baltic coasts and France, Germany, and the Low Countries. Finally, an important north-south trade route developed between the Italian city-states and northern Europe. This route included both sea lanes and a land route over the Alps. Sea lanes came to play an increasingly important role because overland trade was slow and expensive. Europeans desired many things from the East. They enjoyed silk and porcelain from China, and they desired many exotic spices that could be found in the East. Spices like cinnamon, cloves, pepper, and nutmeg. However, the difficulty of transport along overland routes made acquiring these goods costly and troublesome. The growth of commerce in the late Middle Ages made it impossible to continue the barter system, and new coins were minted, such as the Florentine florin. The increased use of money created a demand for banks, whose job originally was to exchange one set of coined money for another. Later, banks created a place for people to store their acquired wealth, and some banks were established to create a system to loan money to people, including kings and queens. Caravels were round-hulled ships that could carry heavy armaments. They were smaller, shallow draft ships that were capable of handling oceanic travel. Europeans used different sorts of technology that had been developed in the preceding centuries to improve the sustainability and maneuverability of their ships. This included the incorporation of the stern post rudder, which had diffused from China, and the use of both the square and lateen sails, which were triangular in shape. These two types of sails allowed sea explorers to navigate the oceans regardless of the wind's direction. Using gunpowder, developed by the Chinese and improved metallurgy, the Europeans developed cannons and guns. These technologies gave the Europeans an absolute military advantage, even though the weapons were often inaccurate. But the Europeans had the military advantage in many of the places to which they traveled, and subsequently conquered. Guns were mounted on the deck of ships, as well as fired through holes cut into the sides of the ships. The astrolabe was a spin-off of an ancient sea tool that had been used by the Greeks. The tool was used to calculate latitude by computing the distance of the sun, or pole star, and the horizon. Europeans later adapted this technology to create the cross staff and back staff, which accomplished a similar task but were easier to use, finding latitude. The computation of latitude was critical in aiding European explorers. You got to know where you are to explore. The compass was also a Chinese invention that had diffused throughout the Eurasian world, and the Europeans used it as one of their most critical navigational tools. The astrolabe was of limited use, particularly if the day was cloudy, and the magnet compass provided a reliable alternative. While some viewed the compass superstitiously because its seemingly magical powers, the needle just moves on its own, the compass, regardless, became a critically important tool in exploration, since it always provided the explorer with a reliable sense of direction. These and other discoveries allowed the Europeans to develop a deeper understanding of the winds and currents of both the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. They were able to take advantage of trade winds on both sides of the equator and were able to plan out their voyages to allow them to take advantage of different types of dependable winds, including the monsoons and trade winds. Cartography, map making. Discovering a superior route to the east for trade required significant map work. For much of the world's existing cartography hindered explorers' abilities to discover a water route. If explorers were to know where they were, they needed to be able to pinpoint their location on a map using a grid of some sort, latitude and longitude lines. They used latitude and longitude to ascertain their position. At the beginning of the age of exploration, there were several significant types of world maps. But the Ptolemaic map was generated by Claudius Ptolemy in the 2nd century. He's a Roman. The map on this slide depicts Ptolemy's world in detail, showing Europe, North Africa, the Middle East, and some places in Asia in relatively accurate detail. It also recognizes that there were possible areas that lay beyond the known land, terra incognita, beyond the land. Although it did note some unknown lands, the map also identified more than 8,000 places in the world that could be depicted in a conical projection. While this map recognized the interconnectedness of the world, it also indicated that the Indian Ocean was a lake, suggesting that an all-water route to east was impossible. Another weakness of this map was that it incorrectly computed the circumference of the globe as smaller than it was and noted that China was larger than it actually was. The Jerusalem map was not a map for navigational purposes or to help an explorer find their location on the globe, but was instead essentially a religious document. For Jerusalem was the focus of the map, and the other known parts of the world were drawn in a representative fashion around Jerusalem. The map itself depicted the world as flat, even though few believed that it was truly flat. With Jerusalem at the top of the map, this map made a religious statement about the centrality of Jerusalem. It did not provide the European explorers with any kind of navigational aid. The Portola map was intended for practical use and contained specific landmarks along European and Mediterranean coasts that were accurately noted so that one could follow them with a compass. This map enabled sailors to navigate the waters more safely. The map depicted major waterways and harbors, and the maps contained lines that connected the harbors. These lines were important because it showed sailors safe routes that could be sailed by using a compass. The weakness of these maps lay in the fact that since they mainly used for water navigation, they contained very little information about interior land locations. It's only good if you're on a ship. Fra Mauro's map was the most famous map in the 15th century. Its shape was round, like the Jerusalem map, but Mauro added a great deal of information that gave the map credibility. Perhaps most important was the fact that the map noted that Africa could be circumnavigated and the Indian Ocean reached by a water route. In 1492, Behaim constructed a globe that indicated that one could get to China by sailing west across the Atlantic. The globe was based on the Ptolemaic map and indicated that there was a single ocean separating Europe and Asia in the west. Although inaccurate, both the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean lay between Europe and Asia. The globe did inspire explorers. Although Columbus's discovery of the New World in the same year that globe was created proved that his Beham was incorrect. The map guy was wrong. The Ptolemaic map experienced a resurgence during the Renaissance as ancient texts were re-examined, and the use of the printing press resulted in the dissemination of copies of this map. Although the weakness mentioned earlier continued to be propagated, Ptolemy's miscalculation of the circumference of the globe actually aided exploration, for it convinced explorers like Columbus that sailing around the globe was much less of a Herculean task than it really was. By the mid-15th century, maps began to change from previous maps, for they indicated that a water route around Africa might be possible. This had yet to be substantiated by European explorers, but rumors abounded. It became evident that cartographers could take advantage of printing technology to make more maps available. The problem, however, concerned the manner in which these maps could be portrayed. Cartographers struggled with projection. How could one take a round globe and accurately depict it on a flat surface? Hipparchus wrestled with the issue of projection and created the system of longitude and latitude in the 2nd century AD. And Ptolemy noted the prime meridian, the 0-degree longitude. In 1569, Gerardus Mercator created a map that was specifically designed as a navigational tool. In creating his system, Mercator elongated the lines of longitude as they neared the poles in order to create a matching scale of longitude and latitude, making it possible to plot a compass course at the same angle anywhere on the map. Although the map may make certain places along the equator seem out of proportion to other places, the practicality of this projection is seen in the fact that this projection is still used on some marine charts today. Additionally, Mercator created a series of maps that compared the recent changes in cartography with earlier maps, such as Ptolemy's. That's our first lesson. Before we talk about the exploring, we talked in this lesson about the tools used, the compass, the astrolabe, the maps,